Welcome to the Reasonable Southerner podcast. The South isn't all magnolias in the moonlight, but neither is it all racism and violence. We are just like you. My name is Frances Coleman. I share my insights about my life and yours. "50 years ago, it was big news. Thanks to the women's liberation movement, women could have it all. All included careers, husbands, children, civic involvement, you name it. And news analysts, authors, and sociologists promised it. Some of it was pretty corny. I remember one commercial which featured a woman singing about how she could bring home the bacon and fry it up in a pan. While that little bit of goofiness is best forgotten, the message was you could be both a person with a full-time career and a full-time family, and that it would be as easy as buying a pound of bacon. Unfortunately, they were wrong, or at least misguided. As things turned out, a 24-hour day would remain a 24-hour day. Women would see more opportunities, more legal protections, and higher aspirations, but they would also have to find a way to jam all of those things into the same number of hours that had been available to their female forebears. The big news wasn't so much fake news as it was news that didn't take reality into consideration. Yes, there would be many more female doctors, lawyers, CPAs, and other professionals, but women also would continue to be primary caregivers for young children and their elderly parents. And they would continue to earn less than their male counterparts for the same or similar work. Which brings us to calendar year 2021 and the most recent unemployment figures from the federal government. The numbers confirm that women have been slammed by the COVID-19 pandemic. The overall jobless numbers are improving, thankfully, with national unemployment now at 5.2% instead of the 14% it hit in April 2020. At the pandemic's worst, women had lost about 5.5 million jobs. And although the Labor Department reported more hiring of women this past summer, economists and women's advocates say the pandemic may set back women's progress in terms of job equality anywhere from 5 to 10 years. The reasons are many, they say, including the fact that the hardest hit industries tend to employ more women than men, hospitality and office assistant jobs, for example. But here's what really whacked women in the past year and a half, and from which they have not fully recovered: the cancellation of in-person schooling. Online education sounds good and in many cases is good, but on the elementary school level, it requires adult supervision and participation. Children are children. They need grown-ups in the house to oversee homework, virtual class attendance, and so forth. If those grown-ups are poorly educated themselves and have no business trying to teach their children, well, in a pandemic, people do what they have to do. Different couples handled at-home schooling different ways, but most often the wife quit her job because it was the lower-paying one. The pandemic caused many a woman to give up or lose her job because of the switch to virtual learning. I cannot imagine how my husband and I would have finessed that challenge. When we were young and our children were of school age, he was often gone for 3 or 4 days at a time, 2 or 3 weeks of each month. I had an editor's job at the newspaper in Mobile, and though in some ways the job was flexible, I'm not sure how it would have lent itself to working from home. However, in the same way couples have navigated the COVID-19 pandemic, I suppose we also would have found a way. But back to today. If a woman is married or has a partner, that person may be able to take up the slack while COVID drags on. If not, then bills can go unpaid and pantries may be bare. Most school systems across the country have returned to in-person classes, which has freed a lot of women to return to work. But that is a mixed blessing in itself, because the pandemic has turned the nation's daycare and after-school care systems on their heads. Between a shortage of workers and rising salaries for those workers, which result in higher fees for parents, some women still find themselves sidelined at home because they either can't find or can't afford childcare. A recent report in the New York Times said childcare for kids too young for school and older kids who need care after school is operating at 88% of its pre-pandemic capacity. School systems and daycare centers can't find enough employees, parents are already squeezed by the cost of daycare, and young mothers can't go back to work because they don't have anyone to look after their children. Talk about a conundrum. Turns out, the sociologists and experts of the 1960s and 1970s left out a lot when they proclaimed that liberated women could have it all. For starters, they didn't mention that most often you need a college or a technical education because that's where the higher incomes are. Also, if you want children, you probably should consider marrying or partnering with someone who also earns a good salary, because single mothers and divorced mothers, especially those with no helpful relatives living nearby, struggle mightily to support themselves and their children. Moreover, if you want a high-powered job that requires traveling, long hours, and 24/7 availability, and you also want time with your family and some time for yourself, not to mention time for chores like laundry and housework, then you may want to keep a stash of anti-anxiety medicine on hand. Because, guess what, my fellow females? You cannot have it all, and nobody should have told you that you could. They should have told you that you would have more choices. Choices are no small matter when you consider how few choices women had prior to women's lib. In general, back then society preferred that you be a homemaker or perhaps a teacher or a secretary. Real careers were for men. Now, of course, careers are for both sexes, but the challenges that come with choices are significant, from daycare versus staying at home, to the division of household chores and decisions about marrying and partnering. And, of course, the bottom line, how will I earn enough money to support myself and, if I have them, my minor children? Some women are luckier than others. I was blessed with a mother and mother-in-law who helped with our children whenever I asked. I also had a good friend who pitched in as needed. Plus, we were also blessed with a saint of a woman who operated a wonderful in-home daycare when our children were babies and toddlers. And, two, I had a job with flexible hours and a good salary. So that even when all of our carefully made plans went to you-know-what, I could still manage. I had viable choices, options, and alternatives. Not to mention gray hair, frayed nerves, and yes, antidepressants to keep me going, plus a counselor who taught me to say no to things like the PTA and book clubs and being a room mother. Those things were out of the question in light of the fact that I had a 45-minute commute to work and a husband who traveled for his job. That's my message to younger-than-I women of the 21st century. Life was tough enough before the new economy merged with COVID-19 to turn our lives, indeed our world, upside down. Now life, adulting as some young people call it, is even harder. The difficult truth and the bottom line are this. With or without a pandemic, the sooner that we all understand that we all have to be thankful for a society that will pretty much let us do what we're willing to work hard to do, but that we must also be realistic about how many different responsibilities tug at us, the better off we'll be. Life is about choices, and you should make yours carefully. Cast aside the misguided promise of the "you can have it all" mantra, and embrace the notion that you can make, that you must make, your own choices and be comfortable with them. Unlike the woman who crooned that she could both make the money to buy the bacon and be the domestic goddess who fried it up in a pan, be the woman who easily shucks both of these expectations and makes her own decision about what she will be and do. That is the expectation you should have for yourself, and your own woman is the kind of goddess you should be. I'm Frances Coleman. I've worked for newspapers for more than 45 years, from Texas to my native Louisiana, and finally to my home near Mobile, Alabama. I've been a reporter, an editorial writer, a columnist, and an editorial page editor. I've commented on the BBC, been a guest on the Rachel Maddow Show, and had my column distributed nationwide. If you like this podcast, please follow it. It's free, and even if you don't like it, I hope you'll find it thought-provoking.